Everyone thinks that Airbnb takes forever to make money. 6 months, a year, maybe more. That is completely wrong. The truth is, my first ever Airbnb property went up at 3 p.m. and at 5 p.m. I got my first booking. Within 1 week, I had cash in my account. That's how fast Airbnbs can make money if you do it right. And by the end of my first year running Airbnbs, I was managing about 10 properties, pulling in $70,000 a month in revenue. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what your first year will look like, the real timeline to $10,000 a month with Airbnb, the costs that beginners forget, and how to avoid the 3 mistakes that kill profits in year 1. And by the end of this video, you'll not only see the real numbers, but you'll also know the exact path to get from property number 1 to a 6-figure Airbnb business. So let's rewind to day 0. Why did that first booking happen within only 2 hours? And how can you engineer that on purpose? Right now, we're in my friend's Airbnb property. He's doing some work right now on the table. Say hi, Stan.
Yo, what's up, guys?
But yeah, we're sitting in his property. We got beautiful high-rise views of Melbourne CBD. I want to talk to you guys about the start of my journey, my first property, the first booking, and what that all looked like. So for me personally, the first booking happened in only 2 hours after listing. And I was underpriced severely, but it was still profitable in day 1. And just for some context, this was a small 1-bedroom apartment in South Bank, and the rent was $480 per week. And the booking I got, and I still remember it to this day because it was crazy, was $500 for 2 nights. So that paid off my entire rent for a whole week in only a 2-night stay. And when that happened, I remember the excitement that I was feeling with Terrence, who was my business partner, by the way. We were ecstatic and we were jumping around, actually seeing all of our hard work and all of our guesswork come into fruition. Because at the time, we had no guidance, we had no proof of concept or track record. So we didn't know if this business model would actually work. Anyways, the reason why new listings on Airbnb get bookings fast is because Airbnb actually pushes new listings in the search results, and so there's immediate demand if the property and the pricing is set up right. Okay, let's talk about how to set up your property right for Airbnb. So when you're setting up your property for Airbnb, you need to remember, what is it that the guest actually wants? You need to furnish your property not only aesthetically but functionally as well. So make sure you're putting as many amenities in there as possible so that you can boost your amenities and therefore boost the visibility of your listing as well. How do you price right? Now, pricing is an extremely underlooked strategy when it comes to listing on Airbnb. A lot of hosts just set a flat fee and forget about it. Let's say for a 2-bedroom apartment, the host might set their pricing at $250 a night, flat for the entire calendar. This is exactly what you don't want to do. Flat pricing doesn't capture the market demand. You need to have dynamic pricing. A tool I highly recommend is Price Labs. It's a dynamic pricing revenue management tool. And this is where your prices are automatically updated in real time to capture market demand, seasonality trends, events, all of that. So instead of having your calendar priced at $200 a night, it's moving up and down according to demand. And so it's capturing the weekend rates as higher than weekday rates. It's making sure when people like Taylor Swift are coming down, you're capturing the highest nightly rates possible. And for example, this year, one of the big events in Melbourne is the F1 Grand Prix. And during this event, all of our properties were booked at 3 to 4 times their normal nightly rate. So some of these properties were getting booked at $1,000 per night for the whole weekend. So this is the power of dynamic pricing. So make sure you're using Price Labs. If you're doing all that and you pick the right property in the right location, then you should be able to get your first booking within the first 24 to 48 hours. And also, look how nice this room is. Look at this view. Incredible. Very nice job. Good job, Stan.
Thanks.
The students that I work with, after they get their listing up, they get their first booking within 24 to 48 hours every single time. That's if you choose a property within a location of short-term rental demand and you price right and you list right. And these people, they get their payouts within the first week. This isn't like drop shipping or content creation where you have to grind for months before even seeing any bit of revenue. The money from Airbnb is instant. But that first booking wasn't even the milestone that mattered the most. The biggest milestone is actually getting your first property, because that is the hardest hurdle of this business model. The hard part is convincing one landlord to say yes. I still remember cold calling agents every day with my business partner until we got that first property. And it took us 3 weeks to do so. I mean, me and Terrence, we almost gave up multiple times, but we told ourselves that we wouldn't be disheartened until we got that first deal. And I'm telling you, when you get that first property, nothing beats the relief when that landlord says yes. It is the best feeling ever. Because once you have that first property, you now have proof of track record. And it's easier to get the ball rolling. rolling because agents trust you, you have credibility in the space, and therefore your scaling accelerates. So in my first year of running an Airbnb business, we got our first property in 3 weeks, and then our second property only came a week after that. And by month 6, I already had 5 cash flowing Airbnb properties that I was able to use the profits from to reinvest into my next properties. And this is something I like to call the compounding effect. Basically, the compounding effect is a fancy term that we use that basically says that using the profits from property 1 to fund property 2, and then the profits from property 1 and 2 to fund 3, and therefore it becomes easier and quicker to scale. So by month 12, I had 10 units in my Airbnb business that was generating me about $70,000 a month in revenue. And one of the biggest credibility boosts that I got was achieving Superhost status within my first 3 months. If you don't know what Superhost is, it's basically a badge that Airbnb gives you if you hit an average of 4.8 stars or above. So this is when agents and landlords actually take you seriously, when you have some credibility, you have some proof of track record, you have properties under your belt already, and you have a portfolio to show when you're reaching out to these agents. And this is extremely important because having connections with agents and landlords is the backbone of this entire business. In fact, the majority of my portfolio came from only 5 to 6 agents. The reason why is they keep coming back to you to give you more properties because they know you are trustworthy and they can vouch for you as a credible tenant. So the next big question is, what does the money look like from a single property in year 1? Okay, what does a single property actually make on Airbnb? So for this example, I'm going to use a Melbourne 2-bedroom apartment. The rent right now for a standard 2-bedroom apartment in Melbourne is about $700 a week, which is equivalent to about $3,000 a month. And this is about $36,000 a year. And the revenue for a standard 2-bedroom apartment in CBD and surrounding suburbs, and this is backed by a large proportion of my portfolio, by the way, is about $80,000 a year. And so the net profit is about $18,000 to $22,000 after all expenses, including cleaning, platform fees, maintenance, small repairs, all of that. So that's about 1.5k to 2k a month in real profit from a single property. And this number is extremely safe when you compare it to corporate salaries because it's huge when you scale your Airbnb portfolio. So in Melbourne, a standard 2-bedroom nets anywhere from $18,000 to $22,000 a year. But in the Gold Coast and in Sydney, these numbers shoot up drastically. This is because the demand in markets such as Gold Coast and Sydney is much higher than in the Melbourne market. Okay, so now that you know what a standard 2-bedroom apartment might net you per year, let's do the math. After acquiring 3 standard 2-bedroom apartments, you're netting $60,000 per year in annual profit. So at 10 properties, you are netting 6 figures while reinvesting and still compounding your wealth. And these aren't projections or clickbait, these are real numbers from the performance of my own portfolio. But these profit numbers don't tell the full story because what catches beginners off guard is the expenses and hidden costs that are forgotten in Airbnb arbitrage. Okay, here's where beginners get blindsided. It's not just rent that you have to pay for. There's also bond and security deposit, which is usually 1 month's rent worth. And this is not really an expense because it's just an asset that's on the balance sheet of your business because you get it back at the end of your lease. But it locks up thousands in cash that you can't use. I have tens of thousands of dollars, maybe even $100,000, just locked up in a government account that can't be used for the lifetime of my business, as long as I have the properties up and running. This is one of the major expenses that beginners forget to account for when running an Airbnb arbitrage business, and it's one of the expenses that limit your ability to scale fast by a lot. You also got furniture and setup costs. Realistically, if you buy things from Facebook Marketplace, which I recommend buying secondhand furniture to lower your upfront investment, it's about $5,000 to $8,000 for a clean and functional 2-bedroom property. And this will include everything: the beds, the couch, coffee table, TV unit, the TV itself, all appliances and white goods like the fridge, washing machine. And this is probably one of the major, if not the biggest, upfront investments when you're picking up your property. Now, this can be lowered if you do go with a furnished property. So usually furnished properties are a great way to scale because they lower your upfront investment into each property. However, you got to realize with furnished properties, you are losing margin in the long run because usually they are a little bit above market price. So you're paying a little bit more on rent, but you're able to lower your upfront investment by saving on furniture.
We just waited like 5 minutes for the elevator and it's probably going to stop 10 times on the way down. First stop. First stop, let's count. Second stop. Second stop. 3 stops within 6 levels. I'm thinking six stops.
Thinking about 17 stops. This is the worst thing about living in a high-rise apartment.
Yeah. You gotta deal with all the people at the bottom. No, it's actually because the elevators are broken. There's a couple that are out of service. That's the reason. That's all it. Yeah. I reckon 7. It's gonna be 414. Oh, clean run down to G. Very rare.
5 stops.
5 stops.
Not bad. Damn, there's so many people. What the fuck? So anyways, those are the upfront costs when it comes to starting your own Airbnb arbitrage business. So that's why I recommend beginners have at least $10,000 to $12,000 to start off getting their first property. And you got to also keep in mind the small expenses when it comes to the operational side of business, such as refunds when guests complain or maintenance and repairs issues. Obviously, you got the ongoing cleaning costs. So just to recap, using the Melbourne 2-bedroom apartment as an example, $700 a week in rent is about $3,000 a month upfront. Plus you got 1 month's rent worth of bond, which is not really an expense, as I said before, but something you get back at the end of the lease, but still money that's locked away regardless. So that's about $6,000 in total, plus your furniture, which can range anywhere from $5,000 to $8,000 depending on how much you deck it out, if you get second hand or first hand. But yeah, basically your upfront investment for picking up your first property is anywhere from $10,000 to $13,000, $14,000. But once live, the cash flow starts immediately. Bookings come often within 24 to 48 hours, your first payout within a week. And here's the part that actually separates amateurs from operators. It's the pricing mistake that really kill your profit. Alright, I'm currently in the second building and going to the lounge. Lounge is this side?
Yeah.
This is a beautiful lounge that is exclusive to the residents of this building, and we are technically the tenants of this building, but we run a business and make money off of the lease. Okay, so one thing I want to discuss with any beginners to Airbnb arbitrage out there is the occupancy ego. Many hosts brag about being 95 to 100% occupied. In reality, that means you're completely underpriced. What I've realized is the sweet spot for occupancy is about 70 to 80% occupied. This number maximizes your revenue while protecting your margins. And on the other hand, people's ego keeps them from lowering their prices. They think that $150 is already too cheap, so they're not going to drop it, and they'll rather be vacant than drop their prices any lower. But what they don't realize is that kills your visibility, and your listing will go down in search results. That's because you're not getting many bookings. And once the algorithm buries you, it's game over. So the lesson here is that you should always be more biased towards occupancy over your actual prices. So the lesson here is that you should be 70 to 80% occupied. But in saying that, for last minute stays, you should be dropping your minimum price to be able to capture those bookings and therefore raise the visibility of your listing. Because once the visibility of your listing goes up, then you can raise your prices accordingly. And this is because the way the Airbnb algorithm actually works. Airbnb's algorithm favors active booked listing. If you refuse to drop your prices when bookings slow down, you will get buried. You get fewer eyeballs, and that leads to fewer bookings, and that leads to a death spiral. So swallow your ego, adjust your rates, and protect momentum. These aren't small leaks, they're 5-figure mistakes. And they're the exact thing that separates amateurs from operators. So if those are the traps, what is the realistic timeline from your first booking to your first 10K month to a full-fledged portfolio by the end of year 1? Many people think that they'll pocket 6 figures in their first year. But the reality is most of the cash that you make actually gets reinvested back in the business. As I mentioned before, property 1 funds property 2, and property 1 and 2 fund property 3, etc. So therefore, if you want to scale fast, then you won't see a profit for a long time. This depends on how big your goals are. So for timeline clarity, I see that a lot of people get their first property within their first month, depending on how much work and how much effort and volume that you actually put in. And then they get their first booking immediately after, within the first week, and their first 10k month is achievable within the first 60 days. And by month 12, 10 properties is possible, which is bringing in about $70,000 in revenue into your business per month. But obviously the net profit is slimmer due to the reinvestment. So usually the sweet spot for progression is property 1 is your proof of concept. When you get to property 3, you actually see real income that can replace your 9-to-5 job. And by property 10, this is when you have enough cash flow to comfortably scale your business and also enjoy a life of freedom. If you want to pocket cleaning fees and just manage 3 or 4 units, that's also fine. You're protecting your margins, but you're also trading your time for money. If you want a business, you should try and build a team and scale. That means you become hands-off with the cleaning, you become hands-off with the guest communications. Your margins will obviously be lower, but that means you as the founder of the business can focus on scale and growth and ultimately make more money in the long term. Year 1 is about building momentum and stacking leverage, not about profit. That's exactly how I built my portfolio and why my numbers don't look like get rich quick screenshots. They look like a business. So you just saw what year 1 actually looks like. Your first property within your first month, your first booking in days, your first 10k a month in 60 days, and a path to get to 70k per month in revenue by the end of the first year if you push. I know that because I did it at 20 years old and I repeated it across 30 plus properties. I've also helped people like Matt and Tan hit 3 properties within their very first week and 9k profit in their very first month. And I've also seen Omar scale from 0 to 10 units in under 5 months and hitting 50k a month. And while others like James took a little bit longer to acquire their first property, even his first property recently brought him $17,000 in pure profit after all expenses from a single booking. So if you want help shortcutting the mistakes and scaling faster, I work directly with a small group of students and the links below to apply for mentorship. But whether you join or not, challenge yourself. Make the call this week, go to that first inspection and get your first landlord meeting. It only takes 1 property to change the trajectory of your entire life. What you do after this video decides if that actually happens.